welcome along to the Breakup Club. I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes for people to join in. So bear with us and we can do the standard awkward pre-Zoom call silence when no one's really saying everything and appearing on the screen, but we'll get going in a couple of minutes once a few more people virtually join us. Okay, well, we've started to fill up a little bit, so I will start talking, and this is the bit that if people come in late and don't catch, it doesn't matter because it's just me talking. My name is Matt Taylor. I'm a lawyer here at Stowe Family Law. Welcome along to the Breakup Club. Got a really great topic tonight, which my colleague Jen Hudec, my lovely co-host for the evening, will introduce shortly. Jen's a brilliant family lawyer in our Manchester office. I'll just tell you a little bit about Stowe Talks for those who maybe this Breakup Club and the Stowe Talks package, that for those who maybe aren't so familiar with it. So the Breakup Club is our free, informal, regular webinar series where we look to get behind the law and deal with the other issues that affect family law. We're family lawyers and we're family specialists, but there are so many other areas where we speak to some brilliant experts, whether it's about mediation, whether about domestic abuse, or whether, as in tonight, it's about financial matters. So this is our chance to kind of share some of this knowledge with all you guys and to delve into some of the other issues and have discussions around some of the key topics that form the backdrop to the work that we do. It's, as I say, it's free, it's confidential, and it's an informal space. So what we're going to hear tonight is a bit of a presentation and chance for everyone to ask some questions and delve into some of the issues. This is part of our sort of wider package of events. We have a website, which is stowetalks.co.uk. And on that, you'll see loads and loads of talks. There's one that delves more into pensions next week, for example. Loads of free content, which has got some really good advice on all sorts of topics. We also have our podcast on there, available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and on YouTube, which has got some of the amazing guests who've been on previous talks before. So that's a little bit about Stowe Talks. I will pipe down for a little bit and I will come back and talk to you a bit later, but I'll just hand over to Jen to introduce tonight's speakers.
So tonight we've got some absolutely excellent speakers from the Money Partnership, and we're personally very grateful to have them on board to be talking to us tonight about the cost of living crisis. Now, obviously, this is affecting everyone, not only the nation over, but arguably the world over at the moment. And it's such an important thing for us to all get to grips of, whether or not in the throes of a divorce at present, or it's something you're potentially considering, or even if you've come out the other end of it. So yeah, really looking forward to hear what they have to say about the matter. Now, the Money Partnership have been working with Stowe for about 2 years now. I've been working directly with Alice in particular and sending my clients across to them because I completely trust them. And I think they are fantastic experts from a professional perspective, as well as just really good to have a chat with. They're very down to earth. So yeah, if you ever need to reach out to anyone, I can strongly recommend their services. So Alice is the Business Development Manager with the Money Partnership. She's the first port of call really for anyone who is sort of reaching out and sending out some feelers for a bit of financial information. And she can also assist with some prep work when you're coming up to any court dates, or you've got any general queries about how divorce may affect your finances, especially outside of the legalities of it. Now, Geraint, and I hope I pronounced that right, I've been practicing, is an IFA with about 20 years experience, just over, I believe. His real aim is to try and provide financial clarity and independence for his clients. And I mean, who doesn't want that really? He's well versed in translating the complex into straightforward language for us all to be able to absorb and take on board when he's discussing his financial advice. And his specialist areas are pensions, investments, mortgages, and also providing bespoke guidance on how to achieve financial security. So with that introduction aside, I will hand you over to them.
Hi Jen and everybody else, thank you so much for the warm welcome. I don't know what's left to say there. It's a lovely introduction. So we do have a bit of a presentation today, but it's not too formal. Obviously, we really just want to answer any questions that everybody has. So we'll cover some certain areas, like Jen mentioned, cost of living crisis, and also other things about how to prepare your finances, how to relay that foundation again so that you can manage your finances and be in control of it by yourselves, and look at some other areas as well, like mortgage capacity reports, which you may have heard of, and also other things like pension sharing. So we'll get started. At the end then we've got an opportunity to ask some questions, and we'll just try and give you as much information as possible, so that you walk away today feeling like you know exactly what you need to do to kind of get your finances back on track. Geraint, did you want to introduce yourself?
No, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure who the introduction was about. I'm guessing it might have been me because she's pronounced my name correctly, which is great. Thank you for that, Jenny. But yeah, let's get on with it. Let's dive into it.
Fab. Okay, let's get the presentation open. There we go. So firstly, we're just going to talk about preparing your finances.
Okay, so we deal with a lot of clients that are in the situation of going through a breakup, going through divorce, and typically what happens is that you'll have the couple will kind of, one person generally will be the one that's kind of in control of the finances or understands the finances, look after the finances, and then the other person will look after the other parts of you know the business together sort of thing. So what tends to happen is that the person that doesn't look after the finances on a day-to-day basis gets themselves into a bit of a panic and maybe buries their head in the sand a little bit, and therefore feels a little bit lost when they're kind of confronted with this going on your own sort of situation. So part of the conversation that we always have with people in that sort of situation is just to kind of take a step back, breathe, and just to get some clarity on what it is that you've got there. So some of the pointers that we've got on here, just to understand what you've got coming in, what you've got going out, write it down on a piece of paper, make it very simple. You know, this stuff is not really complex. You know, if there was something complex about it, then we're here to help you on that, discuss pensions, discuss mortgages, discuss all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, you need to know what you've got coming in and what you've got going out. Be proactive with it. Don't bury your head in the sand. So when we're looking at your income, just understand, you know, how much you're actually getting in on a monthly basis. Understand what benefits may be available to you. If you're not claiming them, look to claim them. And we've got a website later on that we can kind of point you in the right direction to make sure that you can kind of check that you're getting the right things you're entitled to. Liabilities, obviously, you know, make sure that you know what's going out. That's the most important part. You know, money is about what you keep, not what you spend or what you earn. So understanding your liabilities with regards to debt, with regards to, you know, gas, water, electric, the everyday bills, and what you're spending in a weekly shop. Now, the weekly shop has become more and more expensive. You know, when we look at petrol prices, when we look at the cost of living, as this talk's all about, really, you know, what used to cost, you know, trolley full of food would cost £80. Now all of a sudden it's costing £120. So it's just a matter of being aware of what you've got to be able to make sure that you're not overspending and then leaving yourself short in another area, which might be important. For example, your rent, your mortgage, other bills that you need to pay. Understand your assets. So understand what you have in your pension. The amount of people that come to us and they don't even understand that they've got a pension or what's in the pension. So a simple phone call to your provider will allow you to understand exactly what you've got with regards to how much it's worth. And that's really all you need to know is how much have I got in a pension. The rest of it we can explain to you as things go along. Likewise, property. Understand what's your property worth. Understand those things that you might not necessarily know on a day-to-day basis because your partner may have been looking after it. So get to know the mortgage balance, get to know how much the property's worth, how much is the mortgage payments, all of those sorts of questions you need to know yourself rather than relying on your partner because your partner's not there any longer, sort of thing. Personal bank accounts, again, often the situation is with a couple, you'll have a joint bank account. Get your own bank accounts. You know, it's time to go on your own, look after your own money. One thing I recommend to all clients, not necessarily just going through divorce, but every single client that we deal with, we set it up where the client has a bills account where all their direct debits come from. So you work out how much your direct debits are. You put that much money on payday, for example, into that bills account. Anything left goes into your spend account. Now that spend account is money to be spent. So it's okay if you spend all that money, as long as you don't then dip into your direct debit account or your bills account, because you know that if that money's spent, okay, worst case, you can't go out for a meal, you can't go to the pub, but you've got all your bills covered and you know that you're safe, your food's covered, your gas, electric, water's covered, all that sort of stuff is fine. It just means you can't have the nice things in life, which if you've already spent your money, that's your choice sort of thing. So just making sure you're not going deeper into debt or just knowing where you are with it. And then likewise with investment, savings, shares, ISAs, and that can seem very daunting because you're not quite sure of the language and all the rest of it, but ultimately you may have buckets with some sort of money in them. It's just understanding how much is in them. Don't worry about the complexity of what it is and the tax wrapper and the underlying funds and all the rest of it. It's just understanding I've got £10,000 in that bucket there and I know where it is with Aviva, for example, and it's X amount of money. As long as you've got that, you've got a good understanding of where you are, and then we can kind of put things in place to make sure that you understand what these things are as you work along the process.
Yeah, if you've already completed your FORME, and you might be familiar with that, you would have obviously had to collate all this information. But if you're not there yet and you need help gathering any of that information that Geraint just mentioned, we're obviously here to help with that.
Okay, cost of living crisis. Why is the cost of living increased? Many reasons, and I haven't got an exact answer for you because there's so many things that kind of work into the mix. You know, if we look back over the last 2 years, and I'm fed up of mentioning, you know, the pandemic and the COVID and all the rest of it, but, you know, just in that 2-year period, we all know about the furlough payments that were made, the grants were made for business, obviously businesses were affected, the government pumped a lot of money in support. They want that money back, so therefore taxes are going to start increasing, interest rates are going to start increasing, all of that sort of stuff because the government effectively want their money back. Apart from that, then you've got before COVID, you know, we've all forgotten about Brexit. We've all forgotten that even happened because COVID kind of took the media. But if you look at what's happened there, a lot of, in Britain, certainly a lot of the European workers have gone back home, which means there's less workers. British people want more money for the work that they're doing, which again means there's more cost to farmers, to supermarkets, etc., which again is pushing the prices up because we haven't got the staff to be able to do it. So there's a shortage of staff. Then fast forward again back to after COVID, and we've got this Ukrainian-Russian war that's happening, which again is restricting oil prices, putting petrol prices up, and restricting everything. If petrol prices go up, the goods can't be delivered, we can't get back and forth to work. There's just that expense of everything. So, you know, there's a whole host of things as to why the cost of living is increasing. And if you look back over the last sort of 15 years, probably, you know, interest rates have been the lowest that they've been for forever. There hasn't been a time where interest rates have been as low. So this was always coming. There was always going to be an end to that low interest rates, and rates had to go back to a normal period. Even though normal feels low, it's not normal. So there was always going to be this part where interest rates started to creep up. Now, from the bank's point of view, and we have regular meetings with the banks and all the rest of it, effectively what they're saying is that even though interest rates are climbing up 0.25% or whatever, and they may continue to climb up a little bit, but they're not necessarily going to start shooting up like we've seen back in the 80s, where rates went absolutely ridiculous, because the government are aware of what's happened in the past and history, and they don't want houses to be repossessed and people to be really struggling, even though things are a struggle at the moment. But I think that we might see a couple of more, you know, interest rate rises, but I don't think it's going to go ridiculously wild. But I think, you know, it's something to be aware of.
Sorry, just to cut in slightly, and I don't mean to interrupt, just to say that we're not actually able to see your screen at the moment with the presentation. I haven't wanted to interrupt because you've been in full flow, and I'm aware that most of the content is oral anyway. It's very much a background, but just if you come to rely on stuff, it's not fully shared. So if you want to, no, look, it's here we go.
Can you see it?
Yeah, well, it's a rite of passage with any breakup
We're
club.
not technical experts.
No, that's perfect. It's a rite of passage with any breakup club, and in fact, just about any Zoom I'm ever in, that either someone starts talking on mute or the sharing doesn't work. Full disclosure, it's almost always me, so I'm feeling slightly smug that it's not. I'll let you carry. I'll let you carry on. Sorry for the interruption.
That's
Thank
okay,
you.
no problem.
Thank you very much.
So then we've got, how do you manage your outgoings more effectively during the divorce? It's something to be aware of, because you're in that position where the breakup might not fully happen, so you haven't got that financial independence or separation yet. So there are costs that are being shared. And the one thing that I would say with that is going back to the previous slide that nobody saw, but that previous slide was all about getting organised, knowing what your outgoings are, knowing what your income is. If you're aware of what is and being proactive, then it's a lot easier to manage those sorts of costs involved in that period, to a point where then you have got that separation and you're on your own and you know where you are with it. Going on to what I'm entitled to, there's a very good website, entitled2.co.uk. Go on to that. Stick your details in. Look, we're not experts in benefits and what's available to you, but we use this site to kind of point clients in the right direction. So stick your details in there. It'll ask you a couple of simple, straightforward questions that you probably know off the top of your head: national insurance number, things like that, earnings, blah, blah, blah. And then it'll spit out a load of benefits, hopefully, that you're entitled to and how you're able to claim them. So, certainly worthwhile jumping on there to have a look at that. The other thing that we come across a lot is financial responsibility during a divorce. So an example of that would be where, there's a separation, one person moves out to the marital home, but there's still a mortgage to pay on that marital home. And we've seen all sorts of situations where there's an argument over who pays the mortgage, because one party is not living in that property anymore. So therefore they don't pay for it. Understandably, they may have rent to pay elsewhere and blah, 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 blah. However, because most mortgages are set up on a joint basis, if that mortgage payment is missed, it affects both of you. If you're looking to then go on and buy another property and you've got a mortgage payment that's been missed, it's probably one of the worst things you can do when you're trying to get another mortgage, because it affects your credit score. Look, the way that the banks look at it is that if you're going to miss a mortgage payment, which is the most important thing, is the roof over your head, then what else are you going to miss? Now, you can have whatever reasons for it, that you thought your partner was going to pay it and they didn't pay it and blah, blah, blah. The banks don't care. All they see it as is a black mark against your name, and they're going to say no to a new mortgage. So with that responsibility side of things, even though I totally understand the sort of implications and the arguments that could possibly happen, and the he said, she said, all that sort of stuff, but ultimately you're both signed up to that mortgage at the beginning when you took it out. So you're both responsible for making sure it's paid. So one of the things, again, being proactive with it, is to make sure that those bills are paid. Certainly when you're coming out of the other side of it, you're going to want your credit score to be as intact as possible to allow you easy passage into the next part of your life, whether that's buying another property or getting finance or whatever. So, that financial responsibility during those rough months that you go through, which everybody does, it's just making sure that you kind of try and keep your sensible hat on a little bit, and take a step back and from an outside position look in as to how it could affect you further down the line.
Geraint, just a little quick question on that, just while we're on the topic. What can people do? Because we do see situations where there's a joint mortgage, but always one party has paid it and the other party maybe doesn't work, doesn't have access to funds. And you get this in cases of economic abuse when they just cannot make the payment, and an economically abusive partner may refuse to make the payment, which can cause problems. Is it worth, if you're in that position, is it worth speaking to the lender, confronting it, or is there something else that you can do?
Absolutely.
If you're concerned that you don't have the ability to make that payment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always worth speaking to the lender. Lenders will happily work with you. They'll give you payment holidays. They'll do all that sort of stuff to help you as much as possible. They're not ogres and all the rest of it. And so they'll certainly speak to you and help you as much as they can. Ultimately, they want their money. So you can come to some sort of arrangement with them where you could take a payment holiday, or they'll reduce it to an interest-only sort of payment, so a lesser payment on a monthly basis for a period of time, a more prolonged period of time, rather than just a payment holiday for a couple of months. So there's all those things they will help you with. But the one thing I would say to you is that if you're not going to speak to your lender, the lender doesn't know that you're going through the situation you're going through. So they're going to carry on as normal and just assume you can't be bothered to pay the mortgage. So always speak to the lender. Don't bury your head in the sand, because they will help you. Does that answer your question, Matt?
That does. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Good. Okay, and then how can I protect my financial future? And again, just going back to that, being organised and making sure that all your ducks are in a row and you're doing as much as you can possibly do by being proactive and aware of what you're spending and when you're spending, to just get through this period, to be able to put yourself in the best position possible for that sort of the end of the divorce, and when you can set yourself back up into a future sort of position.
Yeah, I think the key message here is that although there's some kind of tick box exercises that you've got to do throughout the divorce, it's just consistently checking in with your finances to make sure that you know exactly kind of what position you're in.
Okay, relaying the foundation. So the divorce is done. We've got that separation. You're on your own again, sort of thing. So going back to the proactivity, and which is the message really across the board, is if you understand what you've got, then you're in a better position and you're less likely to make mistakes with your finances moving forward. So again, making sure you're budgeting on a monthly basis, knowing what you're spending, that separation of accounts, the bills account and your spend account will help you with that. Identifying money habits. So again, we're all guilty of going to the supermarket and chuck an extra few things in the trolley. It's those sorts of things. So make a list when you go shopping. Make sure that you're looking at your monthly outgoings with regards to, have you got the best gas bill, electric bill? Are you on the lowest tariffs? All those sorts of things. And identifying, like I said, those money habits where we are guilty of slipping into things that we do that we don't necessarily notice. So one thing that we notice when we go through clients' finances is that, there's subscriptions to things like Netflix, the gym, all those sorts of things that are not necessarily being used. If they're being used and you're aware of them, that's no problem at all. But there's probably things that you've got subscriptions to, maybe magazines, newspapers, whatever, that you don't necessarily need to have and you don't want anymore, but they're coming out your bank that you don't even know about. So again, going through that and just making sure you're getting rid of those. Any debt that you can get rid of is obviously going to be an advantage. So if you've got any spare money available, get rid of the debt as quickly as best you can. Understanding the mortgage and the pension stuff, like I just mentioned a couple of slides ago, just understanding what you've got and where you are with it, so that you know when your fixed term is coming to an end, or where your pension is held and how much you've got in that pension pot, and just making sure that's reviewed and you understand it. Life protection or life cover, life insurance. Again, going back to the fact that the mortgage was probably set up on a joint basis, to the point where the mortgage, the life cover would probably mirror that. So a lot of people forget and they keep the life cover going to the benefit of their ex-partner, which people are not necessarily happy about. So again, it's just making sure that you're aware of that, revisiting that, making sure that you've got the best deal available to you so you could save some money on that, and just looking at it. Emergency fund wise, if you manage to save an emergency fund, if you can get some money together to put for a rainy day, that's always going to be a benefit to you. And just knowing where that is and what that's doing. With regards to an emergency fund, a message that I always give to clients is that that's not about that money growing for you. That's about that money being available for an emergency. So the roof blows off, you can put your hands on that money straight away. You don't want to tie it up into a fixed interest account or something that you're not going to be able to get, or something that may fluctuate on the market with regards to investments, because Sod's Law says that the day the roof blows off the house is the day that the markets drop and that money is decreased in value. So it's just making sure that you're clever with what you're doing there. And again, just being proactive with that savings and investments. And as you come out to the back end of the divorce, understanding what you've got available to you, and understanding, now that you're in your own position, where is that money? What's it doing for you? Is it in line with what you want to happen? And what are your goals, rather than the couple goals that you may have had previously, sort of thing. So there's a lots of things that we can just kind of talk to you about, and we want you to think about, just to get yourself in line. But really, it's all about being proactive and just knowing what you've got and kind of understanding to a basic level. It doesn't need to be complex. You don't need to be an expert in anything, but just understanding what you've got and where it's held is the biggest message I've got for you.
So we're just going to be moving back a little bit to kind of prior to your divorce settlement, where obviously the courts want to identify how they can split assets fairly. So to do that, they're going to need to obtain things like mortgage capacity reports, which is what we're just going to move on to. Not sure if you've heard of those, but basically a mortgage capacity assessment is when an expert, like a qualified mortgage advisor, will review your current circumstances, so your income and your liabilities, to determine what the maximum is that you can borrow. So that essentially the courts can decide whether you can afford to buy your partner out and keep the family home, or whether you can buy a new mortgage. or buy a new property. So these are something that more frequently people are needing now, and that's something that we can help with. So yeah, like I said, the purpose of a mortgage capacity assessment is to help the courts decide how to split things fairly, but it's also, again, not a tick box exercise, is to help you understand what your mortgage future could look like and what you can actually do. So there's different types of reports. There's something called a standard report, which is based on your current circumstances. But obviously we understand, and other people understand, that sometimes your employment situation can change, you're not sure what deposit you're going to have, you're not sure what maintenance payments you might get. So there might be some different scenarios that you need reviewed whilst you're being assessed. And obviously you want to know what those results would look like. So there's standard report, like I said, or there might be a comparison where it's looking at 2 different scenarios, or you might have multiple scenarios. And that can be done on an individual basis. But more and more frequently, and the courts are advising this, is to do joint mortgage capacity reports, just to ensure that both parties have been assessed in the same way and it's done fairly. So in terms of timescales and fees, just so you know when you need to request a mortgage capacity assessment, obviously they can take a bit of time to put together. Our turnaround time is 5 working days, so we understand that you've got quite a lot of things to get sorted beforehand. So we can turn them around quite quickly, but just make sure that we can obviously send a form over, which is some information you'll need to fill out, which is what we'll need to assess your mortgage capacity. But gathering that information beforehand and sending that across means that we can obviously carry out the assessment and get the report back to you as soon as possible. In terms of the fees, so reports can start from £199 for an individual report, and then go up to £250 for your half of the report if it's a joint report. But again, we can be, if you want more information, we can be sending over information about what form you need to fill out, what those different reports are, and those fees associated as well. So to obtain a report, you can come to myself or to Geraint, and like I said, we can send over what we need from you and we can get the ball rolling. So overall, the report demonstrates, it will lay out all your current circumstances, and then looking at whatever scenarios that you've requested, or whether it's just on your current circumstances, we can let you know what your maximum borrowing capacity is, and then also give you an idea of what those monthly payments will be, what the interest is. Obviously at the moment things change, just so that you know what you can afford and the courts understand what you can afford, so that they know what decision to help you make. But if you have any questions about mortgage capacity assessments, just let us know at the end and I'll be happy to answer those.
Okay, pension sharing. So again, part of the divorce settlement that you'll be going through is the pension. Part of your assets will be a pension. So again, it's just understanding really what you've got there. Like I said, as long as you've got your balance of the pension, some details there, then we can find out exactly what it is that you've got and almost translate what you've got into a way that you understand it. Pensions are weird and wonderful things, and they've got all sorts of different caveats and different rules and different bits and pieces that one pension is not the same as another pension. So that's something that we can help, that you get an understanding as to what it is that you've actually got, or what it is that your partner has got, and how that can be split when we're looking at the bigger picture of other assets that you've got. So all things like that we can help with. We can also then start talking about what your retirement is going to look like, depending on your age and all the rest of it, what your retirement is going to look like, depending on that pension that you've got, or the pension that you might have, depending on the split and all the rest of it. So there's all sorts of guidance and help that we can give you around that, without going into too much detail about the pension side of things. But yeah, we can basically make whatever you've got or whatever you're not understanding, we can try and translate into a way that you can understand. So we're happy to help with all that sort of stuff. Yeah,
ultimately, pensions might not need to be touched, other assets can get split, and obviously everybody wants to protect their retirement plans. But if pension sharing is the way it's going to go down, then we can help with that.
So yeah, I think that the main part really is to look beyond what you're going through at the moment potentially, and look beyond this crisis that we're in, if you want to call it a crisis. The cost of living is going up. The cost of living needs to go up for various reasons and will continue to go up for a while. But I think the main message is to kind of envisage, as Alice has put on the screen there, envisage your life after divorce, and try and think about what it is that you want, what it is that you want to achieve. All along, making sure that you're being proactive with your finances to make sure you're in that best possible position to be able to start on those goals once you've got this part of your life over and done with, to be able to move forward. And And I suppose what we want to do really is help you do that and achieve what it is, whatever it is that you want to achieve post-divorce.
That's the end of our presentation, but obviously we're happy to answer any questions. And
that was great. Thank you both very much. So if anyone does have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A or the chat. That would be great. I just while people are sort of stumping up their questions and trying to put things, I thought the way you finished that with looking at the sort of the long-term rather than the immediate short-term, it's obviously particularly scary at the moment given a lot of what's going on in the world and the pressure that people's budgets are under is really key. I think our common, and Jen, I'm sure will agree with me on this, but please correct me if I'm wrong, a common thing that we see is when people are looking at their financial future, there's a tendency for some clients to say, oh, I don't want the I don't want his pension. I don't want to touch their pension. I want to keep the family home. And that's a conversation that comes up again, and Jen is nodding because we have this a lot. When you have those conversations with clients, how do they go? Do you have a general? Oh, you're on mute there. Yeah, and do you have a general kind of approach to what clients should be consider if they are weighing up those options?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you've got to look at the bigger picture sometimes, and you've also got to look. I'm a big believer in here and now as well, because it's all well and good having a pension and kind of going, well, that's great, but that's for the future, and I've got to be 55 minimum before I can touch that, but I still need a roof over my head now. So it really depends on your circumstances. So I think depending on the circumstances, it is kind of about moving on with your life and then rebuilding and relaying those foundations. But likewise, you've got to take advice from your solicitor that's kind of saying, look, this is a good deal, and that's not for emotional sake or for not understanding sake, saying no, I'm not touching the pension, because that might be by far the biggest asset that is in the family sort of makeup. So you've definitely got to consider it. But then also, I would say that life is more than just money, and I know that's hard for me to say coming from a financial advisor, but sometimes it is about kind of drawing the line in the sand and moving forward with things. And if keeping that marital home is important to you because of maybe children and schools locally and all the rest of it, then there's not, personally, I don't think that's a bad thing to kind of consider. But I would always kind of make sure that you're listening to your solicitor and kind of making sure that that deal is fair, because that's what you're paying your solicitor to do, is make sure you come out of this the best way that you can.
I think that's right. It's I have this conversation a lot, and I never say to someone, you shouldn't do it or you can't do it. It's just about doing it with the right information. And that's where,
Absolutely.
Speaking to you guys, speaking to us is really important. People can make informed decisions.
I absolutely agree with you. And whilst talking about pensions, before we move on to some mortgage capacity questions, because I've seen a couple of those crop up, I'm curious if, because of clients that I've dealt with personally who are either perhaps splitting their pension and they've had a large pension and suddenly they've seen this decrease and they're concerned that they want to get back to a position or close to the position that they may have been in prior to divorce, or clients who have maybe not had a particularly large pension pot and suddenly do have it and now are thinking, wow, I do need to start planning for my retirement and my future. Is there any specific advice you could give to clients, or indeed it may be more nuanced, about how they can not only protect their pension, but perhaps increase the pension pot moving towards divorce? Is there anything they should be looking at doing?
Yeah, I think again, just that awareness of what they've got, whether that is a large pot that's been decreased or a zero pot that's been increased, sort of thing. But I think one of the exercises that we do with clients is a cash flow forecast, where we kind of go, this is the position you're in now. It is estimated and guesswork, obviously, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we forecast that forward up to age 99 and kind of go, well, have you got money left at age 99? If so, there's likely to be an inheritance tax issue potentially. Or if you're going to run out of money at age 62, then you've got to start thinking about how much we're going to put into a pension or to other assets. It may be that, building a pension, depending on where you are in your life and your working life, that you haven't got another 40 years to save for a pension through normal routes. So therefore, you might look at other sort of avenues to build that retirement income when we start talking about rental properties and that sort of stuff to generate that income in retirement. So it's not just about pension stuff, it's about how you survive in retirement. So, you know, that conversation, like I said, whether it's about decreasing the pension pot or increasing the pension pot, it's being aware of what you've got and what that actually means to you, because having 100,000, 500,000 in a pot, what does that actually mean on a monthly basis when you've got no other form of income? And I think that's the conversation you need to have, because a lot of people are surprised where a large pot is halved, but they've still got plenty because they haven't necessarily got the responsibility of another partner, so they don't need as much. So it means they're still okay. Or having nothing to a larger pot kind of goes the same way, where they're like, oh, well, actually, I've got plenty here to be able to survive. I can maybe go part-time in work, or I don't have to have the pressure. But understanding what retirement looks like is a really powerful sort of exercise to do. And then you can kind of backfill from there, whether you need to put more in or not worry about it, or there's other avenues that you can kind of fill up, like I mentioned, rental property, things like that people are going into.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's important to look at things in the round. We can often get a bit, and I think us as lawyers, certainly I am a bit guilty. You sometimes fix on one asset and you're thinking retirement, you're thinking pensions. Having that blend is really useful, and the sort of cash flow type forecasting that you're talking about can be really useful for people. So that's super helpful. So as Jen said, we've had a couple of questions about the mortgage capacity assessment. So the lovely Sue Palmer-Khan, the wonderful divorce coach and friend of the show, she's asked, how far will mortgage lenders take into account child maintenance and universal credit, as well as earned income or unearned income? Can you just delve into some of the factors that go into a mortgage capacity assessment and the different forms of income and how they might be weighed? And also, I often get the question of, oh, do we need one? Isn't it just 4 times my income? So, you know, great to get a bit more insight into the actual process of the MCA. So
if I just break that question down a little bit, so it's absolutely not 4 times income anymore. That used to be a very rough guide as to how they'd work out affordability or how much borrowing capacity you had. That doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't existed for many years. What they do now is look at your disposable income after they've assumed a lot of things. Now, those assumptions are increase in interest rates, any debt that you've got, any children that you've got, your cost of living, all that sort of stuff comes into it. So it's a far more advanced calculation that they do now. And each lender's got a different calculation. So there's not one size fits all with any of it at all. So yeah, the 4 times income, forget that. It's absolutely nowhere near what it should be, sort of thing, to work out the figures. When we're talking about universal credit, child maintenance, all that sort of stuff, so again, depending on the lender you go, some lenders just won't take it into account whatsoever. Other lenders will love it and they'll take it in. So each of the lenders, if you look at it as a market stall, each of them wants to have their market share. So some of the lenders, and you've got the big 5 high street lenders, NatWest, Barclays, those sorts of guys, they've got market share, so they can afford to just take those nice vanilla, straightforward, easy cases. But then you've got the likes of Pepper Money, you've got the likes of Saffron Building Society, which are places that you've probably not heard of, everyday people wouldn't necessarily heard of, but they're the guys that we would go to take into account child maintenance, universal credit, all that sort of stuff. How they assess that would depend very much on the individual case, obviously. So if I take child maintenance, for example, you might have court-ordered child maintenance. Now, most of the time, it needs to be court-ordered. It wouldn't just be an agreement. So for the mortgage lender to take it into account, it needs to be court-ordered. And then they would take into account, if you've got a 1-year-old baby and then you've got child maintenance that's court-ordered, which is going to last the next 18 years, then they're going to take that into account a lot more than if you've got a 17-year-old child that is about to turn 18, you've got 2 months worth of child maintenance. Just because of that amount of income that's going to continue to come or not continue to come, and when that ceases. So that's how they kind of look and assess child maintenance, is all depend on individual case basis and what it is and how long's left on it based on the child's age, if that makes sense. And then universal credit, they will take universal credit into account, but generally you'd need the job to go alongside it. So they would take it as a top up to income rather than income on its own. There was press not long ago, and Boris Johnson, I think, mentioned something about, putting pressure on lenders to make sure that they take into account benefits and these sorts of things when they're assessing income. However, that was just Boris Johnson talking as Boris Johnson talks. I'm not going to mention that. So that hasn't actually come to fruition. The criteria for the lenders is what it always has been, where they will take benefits as a top up to income, but you have to have some form of income. They won't just take it as benefits on its own. That answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So again, it's looking at things in the round, and it's helpful to know that. I think that when you're talking about the marketplace and the market stalls, that's quite a useful analogy, because we see a lot of people who say, I've been to my bank and they say this, and you say, well, that's all well and good, but they are one bank out of X banks, so I'll try again.
We've got something like 350 lenders on our, that we work with, and each one of those lenders has got a different criteria. So, one bank saying no doesn't mean no whatsoever. Do you know what I mean? There's always a way to get it. It's just a matter of, what hoops we have to jump through and where we have to kind of wriggle through to get it to work, sort of thing. But one of the things that I always say to clients is that it's never a no. It's just a matter of what we need to do to get the yes. Now, that might not be yes now, but it might be in 6 months' time we'll get the yes. But we've got work to do to get it sorted. Everyone can have a mortgage. It's just a matter of how we go around it. Like.
Okay, great. Well, just move on to another question. So this is probably a bit more legal. There is a point about sort of mortgageability and what lenders can do in here. So, but it might be largely more a question from myself or Jan. So Alex has asked, at the moment we're in the 20-week wait between making the divorce application and awaiting the conditional order. I'm very proud of myself for not saying decree nisi, because I can't get used to the new terminology. They've agreed to keep the house for the next couple of years to offer stability to the children, and then once sell the house, split the equity. So the question is, would we have to change the mortgage if we're no longer together? And then the second part, which is a more legal question, how can I ensure that when we sell, I get what has been agreed? So if the parties are keeping divorcing, going through divorce proceedings, but keeping the mortgage in joint names, is there any issue with that? Would the lender have an issue with that?
No, there's no issue with that as far as the lender's concerned. As long as both parties are happy to stay on the mortgage, then there's no issue with that. The lender will be fine with that. The issue, or it becomes an issue, when one party wants to then move on with their life and get another mortgage because they're stuck to that one, and that is obviously a large debt. So that needs to be taken into account when they're being assessed for their new mortgage. Generally speaking, you can't have two residential mortgages, so that causes a problem. And obviously the affordability side of it, you're already liable for a mortgage, which is normally pushing up to maximum capacity anyway, because that's why you bought the house in the first place. So it almost stops you getting another mortgage. Unless you've got a huge salary that you can afford both, then that does cause problems. So from a lender's point of view, it doesn't cause a problem as long as both parties are happy to stay on there. The lenders just want their money, basically. But the moving on part could cause a problem. Unless somebody is happy to go and rent, then no issues at all. You being on there is absolutely fine.
Okay, and then in terms of the legals, maybe I'll throw this over to you, Jen. What's the advice to a client who comes here and says, we've come to an agreement, we're waiting for the conditional order. How can I ensure I get what we've said that I should get?
Sure. So, crystal clear and relatively generic advice would be that whenever you reach a financial settlement, the best thing for everyone involved is to get it drafted into a formal document, which is known as a consent order. And that document needs to be sent to the court for approval. Now, that's regardless of whether or not the terms of that agreement, so, the to-do list in that agreement, needs to be actioned right now. For example, I need to sell the house within the next couple of months because we need to split the equity in there and go and buy new properties. Or whether you've got an agreement where you are going to stay in the house for a period of time for stability for the children and or other reasons, but later down the line it needs to be sold, and you need that what we call sort of trigger event or trigger date. So that key event where actually now the property does need to be sold. And of course, both of you are going to need the reassurance that whatever you're entering into, whatever agreement that has been reached, is going to come to fruition in time. So the best way to protect yourself is to get that formally drafted into that consent order, get it approved by the judge. Until that takes place, it's not going to be enforceable if there are issues. So strongly consider getting that drafted up. And once you have got your conditional order after that 20-week wait, that's the earliest time that you can get that document into the court.
Yeah, and the consent order can or what it will also do in most cases, unless there's ongoing spousal maintenance, it will provide for what we call a clean break, and that is the bit which says that neither you nor your spouse can make any further claims against each other or your estates. So that's really important, gives you finality. I'd also say that in this particular situation, there may be some tax issues if you're staying on the property for another couple of years, because without getting too in depth to things, you're possibly creating a capital gains tax liability for yourself in the future when you do transfer that property, because if you transfer properties on divorce as part of divorce proceedings, interspousal transfers aren't liable to CGT when it's in respect of the family home, but you might be creating a tax liability for yourself in the future. You can deal with that if you get an order in place and you're effectively already sorting out the transfer, or at least it's something worth thinking about and potentially getting the advice on, just to clarify you're not going to sting yourself with CGT further down the line. So absolutely right, is get that locked up in the consent order, and then you're going to provide protection for yourself and certainty for your spouse.
The other thing I would add to that, Matt, is when we're looking at mortgage terms, have a think about your fixed rate if indeed you're on one, because that's going to feed back into affordability questions, and we're back at that cost of living crisis again. So are you due a remortgage? If so, when is that due? Because that's going to impact your outgoings as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to avoid those. They can be really hefty early repayment charges if you're looking to do a transfer of equity before the end of a fixed term. I mean, Geraint, Alice, is there any way around those if someone wants to do an earlier transfer, or is it just you are bound to that? Because obviously a lot of people want to change their mortgage at the moment. I've personally just been through it and trying to negotiate whether it's best to change before the rates rocket or the early repayment charge. Is that something that you can factor in? Is there a way around those sometimes?
Unfortunately, no, there's not a way around it. You know, if you transfer equity, then generally what will happen is the individual that's left on the property, on the mortgage, has to go through their own assessment. So effectively it's a new mortgage, even though it seems like they're keeping the same mortgage, they're not. It's not as simple as just taking your name off. That person to remain is assessed under their own right to whether they can afford that mortgage, and therefore there's a new product, which means the old product disappears, so that penalty will apply. Unfortunately, there's not a way around that.
Yeah, and they can be really hefty, can't they? Especially if if you're if you're only a couple of years into a 5-year fixed term, they can be enormous.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. You know, if you're looking at a 5-year fixed rate, which is what most people are doing at the moment, because of the instability out there, then most people are going to a 5 year. So you're looking at a minimum of probably 6% in that first year, which you've got a couple of $100,000 mortgage. That's a big lump of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on slightly, I feel like we're doing actually these questions in reverse. So you went budgeting, then MCA, then pensions, and we've gone pensions through MCA. So let's talk about budgeting, just to, so we've got some nice symmetry to this. One of the things that we have to do in divorce proceedings, which you'll be very familiar with, and anyone who's gone through it or any sort of practitioners tuning in, is as part of your formal year financial disclosure, people have to set a budget. And they have to say, what's my expenses now and what's my expenses in the future? It's a really challenging process for people. It's really challenging. Do you have any top tips on preparing a budget that can then stand you in good stead? Because if you're saying to someone, oh, tell us what your gas bill is going to be for the next 20 years, and they say, I don't know what's going to be for the next 3 months at the moment. How do you go about, advising people on how to set a slightly longer term budget? Because everyone can go through, if you've got access to your bank statements, you can work out what you're spending now. Do you have any tips for how people can look at their longer term kind of budget planning?
Yes and no, I suppose. How long's a piece of string? So it's difficult to answer that question. What's going to happen with, if you kind of asked me 12 months ago what electric and gas was going to do, I wouldn't have said it's done what it's done. But something that we kind of look at when we're doing budget plans for clients is we break it down into categories. So we break it down from sort of essential fixed costs, which may be your mortgage, essential variable costs, which may be your gas and electric. Then we've got desired, which is nice to haves. And then we've got sort of your required stuff. So your required stuff will be your food bill and those sorts of things. And then when we're looking at longevity and you're looking at, the CPI or RPI and how much the cost of living is going up, we just build in those factors. So we kind of forecast it forward. Again, it's guesswork because you don't exactly know what's going to happen with inflation. But if you can build in a certain percentage to carry forward, that will give you an understanding as to what it is, assuming that your income is going to continue to go up at the same rate as inflation, which is probably not going to happen. So it is difficult to answer that question. But I think, again, going back to my point of, as long as you understand and know what your bills are and have those two separate accounts where you've got your bills account with a bit of spare change in it, then those fluctuations in prices are kind of covered off by, if you think your gas bill is going to be £60 a month, or averages about £60 a month, budget £70, and then you've got that little bit of fluctuation. If one month is only 50 quid because you've been on holidays, whatever, then you've got a little bit of spare change in that bills account building up for you. So with that increase, it kind of buffers it a little bit. But I think that's all I would say about it, is just to be on the ball and proactive with it, because if you know what's coming in, you can then budget and not put so much into your spend account, because once it's spent, it's spent. Whereas if it's in the bills account, you kind of know where you are and you know that you're covered. And
do you think, is there one kind of, what's the main mistake that people make with their finances? What's the thing that you see all over, time and time again, you're banging your head against a brick wall, and people do it all the time?
Burying their head in the sand. That's the biggest thing. You know, everything could be sorted, but people just bury their head in the sand. For whatever reason, they don't want to face it. They don't understand it. They think it's worse than it is. You know, and we deal with all sorts of different people, from very, very wealthy people to people with not much at all. And it's the same thing over and over again, just burying their head in the sand and not wanting to face whatever they think the problem is, because half the time it's not actually a problem. It could be organised and sorted.
So on that point, because that's really, really helpful commentary, I was curious, based on clients I've dealt with previously, if someone has been burying their head in the sand and perhaps has got, I don't know, bad credit or use of black marks against their name, I suppose, one, how long is that going to last? And two, what can they do about it proactively?
So again, we deal with it all the time with bad credits, especially when we're doing the mortgage side of things. It's very rare that we actually say no to a client, and they think their credit score is absolutely shot and it's ridiculously bad. And when we look at it, it's not as bad as they think it is. So a lot of the lenders that deal with this sort of mortgage, so forget your Barclays, NatWest, your high street lenders. You know, we're looking at the sort of lenders that specialise in this area. But they look at a default from the point of when the default happened. So they'll say, we want it to be a year from when the default happened, not from when the default was being paid off. And a lot of people think that it's from being paid off. Now, a lot of the banks, like I said, the high street banks will look at, have you paid the default off? So it could have happened 3 years ago and it's still trickling on. You haven't paid it off. So therefore they won't look at you. Whereas some of the lenders that we've got on panel will say, well, when did the default happen? And what was the default for? Why did it happen? As long as we can put a story around that, for example, you're going through a divorce, the banks understand that and they accept that and they'll ignore that default and carry on. Or they might say, well, actually, give us another 3 months worth of good behaviour and we'll look at it. So there's definitely things that we can do. And people think that they've got bad credit, but I've seen some real bad credit and they've still been able to get mortgages. So it's not, okay, admittedly, those mortgages might be more expensive than they would be on the high streets, but you kind of got to go through that pain to get yourself back on track and then 2 years' time refinance onto a normal high street lender and have that nice low rate again.
Brilliant.
Fabulous. That's really helpful. Well, I think unless there are any further questions, or Jen, unless you've got anything to add, or obviously Alice and Geraint, if you've got anything else that you want to say, that probably about brings us to the end of things.
I think we touched on Sally's question very briefly, but I just want to give a bit of a clearer answer on, do you have to get a mortgage capacity assessment? The answer is, if it's been ordered by the court, yes, you do. Potentially you don't have to pay for it, but I would suggest that, having worked with people like the Money Partnership before, their reports are very detailed. They're going to give you a lot more information than perhaps a quick Dr. Google will throw up. One thing in particular that they've hit on today, which from my work I think is fantastic, is some clarification as to what your mortgage payments are going to be moving forwards. Because not only do we have to consider a budget now, but also a future budget when we can start talking. Then we can start talking about if you need maintenance or anything like that as well. And also, what's just reasonable generally about splitting your assets. So that's absolutely key, and that is a perk of getting one of these proper detailed mortgage capacity assessments. If you're not ordered by the court, then no, arguably you don't need to get one, but it is advisable for the vast majority. You know, if you're going to get a mortgage moving forward, you should probably figure out what your mortgage is going to be for your financial security. So whilst the answer may be no, I think it's a really good idea.
I think the court's moving more and more towards these joint assessments. Fairly recent financial conduct rules efficiency statements kind of said that this should be looked on as a norm, and I think probably we solicitors are being a little bit slow to react, and I've not had enormous amounts of buy-in necessarily from solicitors from the other side in my proceedings, but I think having that benefit, as you guys were saying before, about knowing that you're both being judged to the same level, as you know, Alice said, that you're both being approached in the same level, rather than you get one from Dr. Google and you get one from Barclays, and it's like, well, you know, it's comparing apples with oranges, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're getting a lot more of the joint instructions. For that reason, they're coming through a lot more recently because of that reason, because people are just getting totally different information. And like you said, having apples compared to oranges, and it's just not the same, you're not on the same page.
Brilliant. Well, I think that probably wraps things up unless anyone's got anything else. So it just remains to say thank you very much, Alice. Thank you very much, Geraint. That was really useful. Some really good practical tips. And yeah, thanks very much to everyone for joining us today. I just finished with a final plug for, again, Stowe Talks, our series of, you know, if you found this interesting, found this useful, there are a million other talks, webinars, seminars, podcasts covering every topic you could wish to be covered. And if it's not covered, you should drop us a line, because then we'll probably cover it. So thank you very much for joining. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Alice. Thanks, Geraint. And have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you for having us.